York, this is Democracy Now!
Black farmers at the turn of the century represented 1 million black farm families tilling 20 million acres of land, representing 14% of the nation's farmers. Today, we're down to about 45,000 black farmers, and we're basically tilling 4.5 million acres of land. So we've lost a lot of land, and a lot of that is due to the discrimination at the United States Department of Agriculture.
For generations, black farmers and other farmers of color have lost much of their land amidst widespread discrimination. Now the federal government is finally taking steps to address the crisis. President Biden's massive COVID relief package includes $5 billion for farmers of color. We'll speak to John Boyd, a fourth-generation farmer, founder of the National Black Farmers Association. Then we go to Steve Donziger, the environmental lawyer who sued Chevron for ecological devastation in the Ecuadorian Amazon. After Chevron was ordered to pay billions, Chevron went after Donziger personally. He has now spent nearly 600 days under house arrest in New York.
Chevron committed what is probably the world's worst environmental crime ever by deliberately dumping billions of gallons of toxic oil waste in Ecuador, decimating indigenous groups, causing an outbreak of cancer. And rather than pay for a cleanup, they spent billions of dollars to try to attack the lawyers who have tried to hold them accountable.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Biden administration's instructed FEMA, that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to help process the increasing number of unaccompanied migrant children arriving in the U.S. As of this weekend, some 4,200 children were being detained in overcrowded Border Patrol facilities where some of them have reportedly been held for a week or longer, forced to sleep on the floor, unable to shower, or not allowed to call their families to alert them of their whereabouts. BuzzFeed reports the Biden administration's opened a new temporary detention facility in Texas, which will hold children until they're placed in a government shelter or released to family members or sponsors. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who blamed the Biden administration for the increase of migrant children arriving to the U.S., is leading a group of Republican lawmakers to the southern border in Texas today. In legislative news, the Democrat-controlled House is moving ahead with two major immigration bills this week, which could create a pathway to citizenship for millions: the American Dream and Promise Act and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which would lead to a pathway for citizenship for farm workers and dreamers. Direct payments of $1,400 have started to hit bank accounts days after President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus bill. Nearly 70 million U.S. residents have received at least one vaccine dose, with about 11% of the population fully vaccinated. Georgia's dropped the age of vaccine eligibility to 55. Millions more Californians are now eligible after the state expanded vaccine access for people with pre-existing conditions and disabilities. Los Angeles is offering the vaccine to people living or working in congregate facilities, including prisons and shelters for unhoused people. Republican voters have become one of the largest unvaccinated groups in the country. A recent poll found over 40% of Republicans said they would not get vaccinated versus less than 15% of Democrats. Over the weekend, Dr. Anthony Fauci called on former President Trump, who was secretly inoculated before he left the White House, to encourage people to get vaccinated. As crowds of spring break revelers hit the beach in Florida and elsewhere, Dr. Fauci also warned again that rolling back public health measures too soon could lead to new outbreaks.
We're not in the end zone yet, and that's one of the issues, that when you plateau, there's always the risk of a surge. That's exactly what the Europeans have experienced.
In Italy, 3/4 of the population are under a new lockdown after a 15% increase in cases was recorded last week. A more transmissible coronavirus variant, first identified in Britain, has been spreading throughout Italy. Meanwhile, a German health official has declared Germany's third coronavirus wave has begun. Brazil has surpassed India in COVID-19 cases, making it the second hardest hit country for both infections and deaths in the world after the U.S. More countries, including Ireland, Thailand, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, are suspending or delaying use of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine after reports of blood clots and one death in Denmark. No clear link between the vaccines and the blood clots has been demonstrated. The UK medicines regulator and the World Health Organization have said there is no reason to stop administering the AstraZeneca vaccine. A warning to our viewers, the next story contains graphic footage of state violence. Burma's military rulers have extended martial law after the deadliest day of political violence since the February 1st coup that toppled the elected civilian government of Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy party. On Sunday, Burmese soldiers killed at least 38 people countrywide, with widespread reports of soldiers firing live ammunition into crowds of nonviolent protesters. A human rights group said at least 126 people have been killed and over 2,100 arrested since the coup. A parallel civilian government in exile is calling for a revolution to overthrow the military junta. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Biden administration has granted temporary protected status to Burmese people living in the U.S. for 18 months. In Afghanistan, a car bomb in western Herat province killed at least 8 people and injured over 50 Friday, most of the victims civilian. No party has claimed responsibility for the attack. Earlier this month, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken wrote to Afghan President Ashraf Ghani in an effort to accelerate an agreement ending the decades-long conflict ahead of a proposed meeting in Turkey. The New York Times is reporting the U.S. has around 3,500 troops in Afghanistan, about 1,000 more than previously disclosed. Under a deal struck by the Trump administration, the U.S. is set to withdraw its military by May 1st, though it's not yet clear if Biden will follow through with that timeline. Kosovo's formally opened its embassy in Jerusalem, becoming the third country after Guatemala and the United States to move its embassy there, even though Israel's illegally occupied East Jerusalem since 1967. Under a normalization deal announced by former President Trump last September, Israel recognized Kosovo's independence from Serbia in exchange for Kosovo's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Meanwhile, the Czech Republic has opened a Jerusalem branch of its Israeli embassy. In Nigeria, at least 39 students are missing after gunmen raided a forestry college in northwest Nigeria's Kaduna State last Thursday. It's the 4th mass kidnapping from a school in northern Nigeria since December. In Guatemala, the remains of 16 migrants who were massacred while crossing Mexico as they attempted to reach the United States have been repatriated. The families of the deceased continue to demand justice. This is the father of one of the victims.
It hurts to lose a child. He went to look for a better life. He wanted to build his house, help his family, his siblings. That was his goal, but unfortunately he was killed in the Tamaulipas massacre.
In January, 19 bodies were found shot and charred inside a pickup truck in the northern state of Tamaulipas near the U.S.-Mexico border. A dozen Mexican police officers were arrested in connection with the killings. According to the Guatemalan government, at least 5 people survived the massacre and are currently under protection in the United States. In Bolivia, former interim president Janine Áñez has been arrested and faces terrorism charges over her involvement in the 2019 military coup that overthrew then-President Evo Morales. Other members of Áñez's right-wing interim government also face possible charges, as well as military and police accused of carrying out massacres and violent repression against indigenous communities and supporters of Morales. Evo Morales' return to Bolivia last November after a year in exile following the election of President Luis Arce and the return of Morales' MAS party. A warning to our audience, the next stories include references to sexual violence. In Britain, outrage is mounting after London police forcibly and aggressively broke up a vigil Saturday evening in memory of Sarah Everard, a woman who was kidnapped and killed earlier this month. A police officer has been charged in her murder. This is a mourner at Clapham Common, where a memorial has been set up near where Everard was last seen.
This has affected every woman across the country. What it's done is it's kicked up every single thing that's ever happened to us. And as a collective, we needed to come together to be able to grieve that as a process. And basically, the police robbed us of our human rights for collective grief.
This comes as British lawmakers are considering a bill to give police greater authority to crack down on protests. The minority Labour Party has vowed to oppose the new law. In Australia, tens of thousands of people took to the streets across the country today amidst a recent wave of allegations of sexual assault and discrimination against high-level political figures, including Australia's Attorney General. A former staffer for the Liberal Party, Brittany Higgins, recently went public with an accusation of rape against a former colleague. Other women have since come forward to say they too survived sexual assault by the unnamed man. Brittany Higgins spoke at today's rally in Canberra.
I was raped inside Parliament House by a colleague, and for so long it felt like the people around me only cared because of where it happened and what it might mean for them. It was so confusing because these people were my idols. I had dedicated my life to them. They were my social network, my colleagues, and my family. And suddenly they treated me differently. I wasn't a person who'd just gone through a life-changing traumatic event. I was a political problem.
Back in the United States, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and the majority of New York's U.S. Congress members have now called on Governor Andrew Cuomo to resign as investigations continue into multiple accusations of sexual misconduct, as well as his cover-up of thousands of COVID-19 nursing home deaths. This is Senator Gillibrand.
Because of the multiple credible sexual harassment and misconduct allegations, it's clear that Governor Cuomo has lost the confidence of his governing partners as well as the people of New York. That's why I believe that the governor has to resign.
President Biden, who himself has been accused of sexual assault, said Sunday he's waiting to see the outcome of ongoing investigations into Governor Cuomo's behavior. Meanwhile, The Washington Post is reporting Cuomo ally and New York vaccine czar Larry Schwartz has been contacting county officials to determine their loyalty to Cuomo amidst the mounting scandals. One person contacted by Schwartz filed notice of an impending ethics complaint and feared their response could impact their county's vaccine supply. The city of Minneapolis Friday reached a record $27 million civil settlement with the family of George Floyd. This is civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who represents Floyd's family.
In this historic agreement, the largest pretrial settlement in a police civil rights wrongful death case in U.S. history, makes a statement that George Floyd deserved better than what we witnessed on May 25th, 2020. That George Floyd's life matters, and by extension, Black lives matter. It sends a message that the unjust taking of Black life will no longer be written off as trivial, unimportant, or unworthy of consequences.
This comes as the criminal trial for former officer Derek Chauvin, who killed Floyd by kneeling on his neck for over 9 minutes, continues. 7 jurors have now been selected. And protests and gatherings were held in Louisville, Kentucky, and other cities across the United States Saturday, marking 1 year since plainclothes police officers busted through the door of Breonna Taylor's home in the middle of the night and shot her dead. Breonna Taylor was an African-American 26-year-old emergency medical technician and aspiring nurse. This is Keturah Herron of the ACLU of Kentucky.
No one has been charged, no one has been prosecuted or convicted for her murder. And it's important for people to remember that. And that we have to continue to fight. And we can't stop. We have to keep going. And we cannot rest. Breonna was not able to rest, so we should not be able to rest until people are held accountable for the murder.
On Friday, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, filed a federal lawsuit against the Louisville Police Department for violations of his constitutional rights. Walker, who was in the apartment with Taylor when she was killed, was cleared just last week of charges of allegedly shooting and wounding police officer during the deadly raid. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. When we come back, generations of black farmers and other farmers of color have lost the vast majority of their land amidst widespread discrimination. Now the federal government is finally taking steps to redress the crisis. President Biden's massive COVID relief package includes $5 billion for farmers of color. We'll speak with John Boyd, fourth-generation farmer and founder of the National Black Farmers Association. Stay with us.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk home through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on.
You'll Never Walk Alone, sung by Brittany Howard. The song became an unofficial anthem to support first responders and medical staff during the pandemic. Howard also performed the song during Sunday's Grammy Awards ceremony, a song that was a record for women wins. The Grammy Awards were a record for Grammy winners, women Grammy winners last night. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show looking at a major provision in President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that aims to address decades of discrimination against Black, Hispanic, Native American and Asian American farmers who've historically been excluded from government agricultural programs. The American Rescue Plan sets aside $10.4 billion for agriculture support and allocates about half the funds to farmers of color who are, quote, subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice because of their identity as members of a group, unquote. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights confirmed as long ago as 1965 the U.S. Department of Agriculture discriminated against black farmers, but little was done to address the problem, and the number of black-run farms dropped 96% in the last century. By 1999, 98% of all agricultural land was owned by white people. In 2010, Congress approved a $1.2 billion settlement for thousands of black farmers denied USDA loans because of their race. But a 2019 study by the Government Accountability Office, based on the USDA's own data, shows farmers and ranchers of color continue to receive disproportionately smaller farm loans. The provision in the new COVID relief package is drawn from legislation introduced by newly elected Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, who's Georgia's first black senator and also the first Georgia Democrat to serve on the Agriculture Committee in 3 decades. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack welcomed the measure.
The history of USDA, unfortunately, involved a level of discrimination against a number of minority producers, black farmers, Native American farmers, Hispanic farmers. And there's an effort, I think, with this package to try to deal not with the specific acts of discrimination, but the cumulative effect over a period of time. When people are discriminated against, they basically get behind, and it's really hard for them ever to catch up. And the result, of course, is that we've seen a significant decline in the number of minority producers around the country. So this is providing some debt relief for those minority producers, those socially disadvantaged producers, to impact and affect the cumulative effect of, to offset the cumulative effect of discrimination over a period of time.
But the effort to address the USDA's history of racism has come under fire from some Republicans, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who lashed out against the measure during a Fox News interview.
Let me give you an example of something that really bothers me. In this bill, if you're a farmer, your loan will be forgiven up to 120% of your loan, not 100%, but 120% of your loan if you're socially disadvantaged, if you're African American, some other minority. But if you're white person, if you're a white woman, no forgiveness. That's reparations. What has that got to do with COVID? So if you're in the farming business right now, this bill forgives 120% of your loan based on your race. These people in the Congress today, the House and the Senate on the Democratic side, are out of control liberals.
Senator Graham's comments prompted a stern response from House Majority Whip James Clyburn, who's also from South Carolina. He was speaking on CNN.
Lindsey Graham is from South Carolina. He knows South Carolina's history. He knows what the state of South Carolina and this country has done to black farmers in South Carolina. They didn't do it to white farmers. We're trying to rescue the lives and livelihoods of people. He ought to be ashamed of himself.
For more on the fight to end discrimination at the USDA and restore land to black farmers, we go to Boydton, Virginia, to speak with John Boyd, fourth-generation black farmer, founder and president of the nonprofit National Black Farmers Association. John, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Can you start off by talking about this $5 billion and what it means? Give us the history.
The $5 billion is historic in nature, Amy, and thank you for having me again. And what it's going to do to help black farmers and farmers of color in this country. You know, as you know, we've been suffering, and the $5 billion calls for debt relief. So that would give many black farmers a jump start if they can get rid of the debt at the United States Department of Agriculture. And there's $1 billion to set aside for technical assistance and outreach and to really dig down into the core of the discrimination at the United States Department of Agriculture. Both of these measures I've been fighting for over 30 years. So I don't want anybody who's watching this show think that this is some new measure that or new idea or concept that happened overnight. I've been trying to fix this measure for over 30 years at the United States Department of Agriculture. And Amy, I probably spoke to you about it 10 years ago. So we've been trying a long time, and this is a huge victory for black farmers and farmers of color, Native Americans and Hispanics and other socially disadvantaged farmers.
Can you explain how over the last century black farmers lost 90% of their land?
Yes. And at the turn of the century, we were tilling about 20 million acres of land, primarily in the southeastern corridor of the United States. And we were close to 1 million black farm families strong. And for those who don't understand the history, every black person in this country was 1 or 2 generations away from somebody's farm. And we survived slavery. We survived sharecropping. We survived Jim Crow. And here we are in the year 2021, and I'm talking to you about discrimination at the United States Department of Agriculture. We lost this land by discriminating, from receiving discrimination by USDA. And I was one of those recipients where the government clearly discriminated against me. I have a 14-page letter from them admitting to the guilt and those egregious acts that I faced by this county official, the person responsible for making farm loans, spat on me and used racial epithets, referred to me and other senior statesmen in Mecklenburg County, Virginia, as boy. He came to my farm, wanted me to sign a check over to him personally with a loaded handgun. And I can tell you, Amy, he didn't treat white farmers that way in Mecklenburg County. He would only see black farmers on Wednesday. All of us would be lined up in the hallway with the same date and time on it. And he was referring to these elderly black farmers. Many were deacons and preachers and leaders in the community as boy and talking downward towards them. So this is deep-rooted discrimination that's been going on in very pervasive ways for a very, very long time.
Can you respond to Senator Lindsey Graham and talk about the history of Lindsey Graham from South Carolina when it comes to this issue?
Yes. Well, first of all, I've lobbied Senator Graham as when he was in the House and in the Senate. And I've had meetings with him and buttonhole meetings, trying to get him to support the Claims Remedy Act of 2010. He has over 6,000 black farmers in his state. He knows the discrimination that I'm about, and I've spoken to him personally about this discrimination. Amy, he never once used his megaphone to talk about or investigate the acts of discrimination that black farmers like myself faced. So I'm calling for today on your show. I want him to apologize to the black community, to black farmers, and apologize to this country for his wrong stance on this. 49 members voted on 10 different amendments to strip or lessen the language that was in the COVID spending bill for black farmers. 49 senators, Republican senators, voted to take that out. And Senator Lindsey Graham was one of them. He's never tried to help. He's divisive. He's wrong for this country. And that message, that concept, the message of hatred and division that he continues to preach on Fox News isn't the American way. That's not the way to bring America back. Here we are for 30 years trying to get this done. He should have took some time to say, well, what can we do to help this measure to make farming better for blacks and other farmers in this country? And he never once spoke about all of the money going to white farmers. Just, for example, under the Trump administration, $29 billion with a B, went to white farmers. What is his definition of that? All of the subsidies and programs and loans and all of these incentives at USDA for all of these decades have went to white farmers. What is his definition of that? So that's what we've been talking about clearly for a long time, a system that has discriminated and mistreated and took and stole land from black farmers for decades, and it went unchecked in this country. If he wanted to check something, he should have been checking about discrimination at USDA. He should have been checking about sharecropping in his historic states, South Carolina. These are things that Senator Lindsey Graham should have been doing.
And the significance of it being Reverend Warnock, now Senator Warnock from Georgia, the new Democratic senator, being the one who pushed this forward and sitting on the Agriculture Committee.
Yes. This is a historic nature, and my hat goes off to Reverend Warnock, Senator Cory Booker. For the first time in history, Amy, this is a new day in America. We have two blacks on the Senate Ag Committee. We have the chairman in the House, Chairman Scott, also from Georgia, a chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. We have now a President Biden, and a vice president who wants to help rectify some of the problems that we faced. And I spoke to the president about this last February, and he committed to me that he would help me fix the issues at the United States Department of Agriculture. So I would like to recognize President Biden for signing that bill and making sure that we stayed in there. So my hat is off right now to this administration for doing the right thing and having the guts to stand up to people like Lindsey Graham and the other 49 senators who simply don't want to help people, black farmers and poor people in this country.
I wanted to ask you about Tom Vilsack, the new, once again, head, but also past head of the USDA. The NAACP has noted Vilsack had lied to conceal decades of discrimination against black farmers. The NAACP president, Eric Johnson, responded to Biden's nomination of Vilsack to head the USDA, calling it extremely problematic for the African-American community. He cited the 2010 controversy when Vilsack served as Agriculture Secretary during the Obama administration and fired Shirley Sherrod from her USDA position overseeing rural development amidst a misunderstanding over racial comments. Vilsack would later apologize. Johnson told the Washington Post, quote, "We think that an individual who unjustifiably fired Shirley Sherrod, who is a civil rights icon, a legend who worked with John Lewis, should not be considered. We should not go backward. We should go forward." Well, in fact, Vilsack is once again the head of the USDA. John Boyd, have you spoken to him, and what are you demanding?
Well, two things. Yes, I have spoken to him. And one of the things that President Biden also committed to me during our one-on-one visit in South Carolina, that there would be change in leadership at USDA. So when they announced that Secretary Vilsack was coming back to USDA, he was not my pick, and he wasn't the pick for black farmers. He was the pick that President Biden wanted to come back. I wanted new blood, new leadership, someone would take a much more aggressive campaign against this discrimination at the United States Department of Agriculture. And Amy, when I lobbied all of those years for the Claims Remedy Act of 2010 that put in place $1.25 billion for black farmers, Secretary Vilsack was, in my opinion, too slow to act. I didn't get the help on Capitol Hill, neither in the House or the Senate. And Valerie Jarrett from the White House the last 5 or 6 months got on board and began to campaign to help me pass that measure in the House and Senate. So I didn't think he was the right person, but I spoke to him here a couple of days ago, and he congratulated me on the measure in the bill. But I also urged him to put in swift action to make sure that these payments and the debt relief and all of these measures, the outreach and technical assistance, reach black farmers and farmers of color expeditiously, not to sit on it and try to figure out a plan of action. If we can get $1,400 in the mailbox and direct deposit into Americans, then we can disperse and relieve debts for black and farmers of color expeditiously, and I urged him to do that.
And finally, you mentioned the Trump administration and black farmers, farmers of color. How does it fit into past presidents? How would you assess the Trump administration?
Worst administration in history for black farmers since my 38 years of doing this kind of work, Amy. My visit, and I've had the opportunity to sit down with every agriculture secretary, both Republican and Democrat, in the cage at USDA, and former Secretary Sonny Perdue, in my visit with him was the worst conversation I ever had. He said, Mr. Boyd, that your farmers, i.e. black farmers, are going to have to get large or get out of business. And when I urged him to have more blacks on the county committees and all of the USDA commissions, he said he didn't need people that were lazy and didn't want to work. How egregious for former Secretary Sonny Perdue to say that. I told him that I didn't know any black farmers that are still farming, that have been treated worse than dirt by USDA, that are lazy and don't want to work. Amy, I work 7 days a week, including holidays and Christmas, and I've been working all of my life, and that's the way many black farmers have. The issue here is we haven't had access to credit the way that the white farmers have. And for that type of position from the Trump administration set us back a little further. And not only just in black farmers, but in race relations in this country, the Trump administration set black people and divided this country And our former Secretary Sonny Perdue was at the core of that, taking the land away from black farmers. He didn't even have an assistant secretary for civil rights, a position that I lobbied for and campaigned for many years to get into the Farm Bill. They didn't even fill that position. So what does that tell you about the Trump administration's commitment on civil rights and resolving complaints from black and other socially disadvantaged farmers? Sonny Perdue gets an F from me, and I hope he heads to retirement in politics, because he really done a bad number on blacks and other farmers of color in this country.
John Boyd, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Fourth-generation black farmer, founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association. When we come back, we go to Steve Donziger, the environmental lawyer who sued Chevron for ecological devastation in the Ecuadorian Amazon. After Chevron was ordered to pay billions of dollars, Chevron went after him personally. Donziger has spent nearly 600 days under house arrest. We'll speak to him at his house. Stay with us.
Caminando por la calle del pueblo cura, qué nivel de calentura, sudando el corazón. Qué locura, ardiendo el sol bravura, y una bandada de loras en las alturas. Y es que la raza ya no aguanta más la tortura, ¿cuánto durará? Y estamos todos púrpura. Y hasta el pueblo se satura, la selva se sulfura. Vamos pa' rezar que la lluvia no se apura. Yo voy a cantar pa' que llores con dulzura. Yo voy a cantar pa' que bailes con soltura. Yo voy a cantar la tormenta ya madura. Todos a la calle, los trenos ya murmuran. Los trenos ya murmuran. Eres lluvia, eres como el agua clara por la cordillera. Tú vas bajando, mi amor, tú me vas quitando el calor.
Lluvia, or Rain, by Mateo Kingman. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to what's been described as the Amazon's Chernobyl. 1,700 square miles of land in the Ecuadorian Amazon, devastated by decades of reckless oil drilling. 10 years ago, Ecuador's Supreme Court ordered Chevron to pay $18 billion for dumping over 70 billion liters of oil and toxic waste into the Amazon. The ruling came in a lawsuit brought on behalf of 30,000 Amazonian indigenous people who'd been suffering since the mid-'60s, when Texaco began drilling on their ancestral land. Chevron bought Texaco in 2000. The landmark ruling was seen as a major victory for the environment and corporate accountability. But Chevron refused to pay or clean up the land. Amazon Watch has spent years documenting the environmental destruction in Ecuador. This is part of a short video produced by the group and narrated by the actor Peter Coyote.
Today, in an Amazon rainforest region of northeastern Ecuador called the Oriente, tens of thousands of men, women, and children are surrounded on all sides by widespread oil contamination. The soil polluted, the water poisoned. Over nearly 25 years in Ecuador, American oil giant Chevron, in the form of its predecessor company, Texaco, engaged in reckless pump-and-dump oil operations that ravaged thousands of square miles of once pristine Amazon rainforest. To increase its profit margin by a few dollars per barrel of oil, the company cut corners and used a populated rainforest ecosystem as its toxic dumping grounds. The result? Tens of thousands of people who live in what was once a paradise on Earth now face a horrific epidemic of cancer, birth defects, miscarriages, and other oil-related illness. And the indigenous peoples who've lived off the bounty of the rainforest for countless generations now struggle for survival.
Instead of cleaning up the Ecuadorian Amazon, Chevron has spent the past decade waging an unprecedented legal battle to avoid paying for the environmental damage, while also trying to take down the environmental lawyer Stephen Danziger, who helped bring the landmark case. With the help of dozens of law firms, Chevron has ended Danziger's legal career. He's been disbarred. His bank accounts have been frozen. He's been forced to surrender his passport. Steve Danziger has also been under house arrest for nearly 600 days after a federal judge drafted criminal complaint charges against him for refusing to turn over his cell phone and computer. In an unusual legal twist, the judge appointed a private law firm with ties to Chevron to prosecute Danziger after federal prosecutors declined to bring charges. Many of his supporters see Danziger as a corporate political prisoner. His case is attracting growing attention with the legal world as well as among environmentalists and human rights activists. 55 Nobel laureates, including 10 recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize, have called for an end to the judicial attacks on Danziger. A coalition of groups including Amnesty International, Amazon Watch, the National Lawyers Guild, and others recently wrote to Attorney General Merrick Garland asking him to investigate what they describe as, quote, disturbing legal attacks on Danziger. Last week, an appeals court threw out a key contempt finding against Danziger, who's now waiting to hear if he'll be freed from house arrest. Steve Danziger joins us now from his New York home. We're also joined by Paul Pazimino in Oakland, Associate Director at Amazon Watch. He's been working on the Clean Up Ecuador campaign for the last 14 years. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Steve Danziger, thanks so much for joining us. Why are you under house arrest? Are you currently wearing an ankle bracelet, a shackle?
I am. I am wearing an ankle bracelet. It's about the size of a garage door opener. It's been on my ankle since August 6, 2019. I sleep with it. I eat with it. I bathe with it. It never leaves my ankle, and it allows the government to monitor my whereabouts on a 24/7 basis. I mean, the fundamental issue here is Chevron destroyed the Ecuadorian Amazon, and I was part of a legal team that held the company accountable. The decision in Ecuador has been affirmed by multiple appellate courts in Ecuador and Canada. What Chevron did is, rather than pay the judgment that it owes to the thousands of people in Ecuador that it poisoned, it's gone after me and other lawyers. And in the United States, Chevron sued me for $60 billion, which is the largest potential personal liability in the history of our country. I'm a human rights lawyer. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with my wife and son on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Chevron then launched a campaign to really try to drive me out of the case, and as part of their strategy, they demanded to see my confidential communications with my clients, including everything on my cell phone and computer. And when I appealed that, to the higher court here in New York, while the appeal was pending, Judge Kaplan charged me with criminal contempt of court for not complying with the order while the lawfulness of the order was under appeal. He then had me locked up in my home. This is a misdemeanor charge with a maximum sentence of 180 days in prison. I assert my complete innocence. He appointed a judge who denied me a jury, and I am the only person in the history of this country, as far as we can tell, who's charged with a misdemeanor in the federal system, who has no criminal record, who's ever been held for even one day pre-trial, and I've now been held 585 days on a charge that, if I were to be found guilty, would lead to a maximum penalty of 180 days in jail. And it's very unlikely I would go to jail, because the longest sentence ever imposed on a lawyer convicted in this district of criminal contempt is 90 days of home confinement. And I've already served more than 6 times that. So what's really happening here is Chevron and its allies have used the judiciary to try to attack the very idea of corporate accountability and environmental justice work that leads to significant judgments. And I think they're not only trying to retaliate against me, they're trying to send a broader message to the activist community, to the legal community, that these types of cases that truly challenge the fossil fuel industry, that are intimately connected to the survival of our planet, should not be allowed to happen in court, at least not at this level. And, you know, I am hoping, and we had a huge victory last week in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals where Judge Kaplan's main contempt finding against me was thrown out. And I am hoping cooler heads prevail and the Second Circuit issues another decision based on last week's argument that allows me to get my freedom back.
Everything about this is so unusual, is so astounding. Can you explain what Rule 42 is and the idea that the judge could not get federal prosecutors to indict you, so he was able to choose a private law firm, a lawyer from a private law firm connected to Chevron, and he went after you?
Well, I don't think this is proper, and I don't think it's legal. It is legal for a judge to charge someone with criminal contempt with an adequate basis. I don't think one exists here. The judge is then obligated under Rule 42 to take the charges to the regular prosecutor, the professional prosecutor's office. And in this case, the professional prosecutor refused to bring the case. And I think for good reason, again, because I don't think this is all about me doing my job as a lawyer and trying to defend my client's rights. It isn't about me defying the court. I was seeking more court review. I wasn't defying the court when I appealed Judge Kaplan's order that turned out to be unlawful. So when the prosecutor refused to bring the case, Judge Kaplan appointed a private law firm. Now, it is legal for a judge to appoint a private lawyer to prosecute in those circumstances, but it is not proper to appoint a law firm that has financial ties to Chevron and has an attorney-client relationship to Chevron. I mean, I am essentially being prosecuted by Chevron. The law firm's name, by the way, is Seward and Kissel. They're a kind of a mid-sized law firm here in New York. What's really unusual about this is not only does Seward and Kissel have a financial relationship with Chevron, they have close ties to the oil and gas industry generally, and they're billing taxpayers for my misdemeanor prosecution. So far, they've been paid by taxpayers $464,000 to prosecute and detain me on a misdemeanor contempt charge. My guess is they've actually been paid a lot more. We haven't seen all of their bills. But this is, make no mistake about it, Amy, this is a for-profit, private, corporate prosecution of a human rights lawyer in the name of the government. And it's never happened before in the history of this country. It's terrifying, not just for me and my family, but I think for anyone who does this work. And I'm hoping that more and more people will notice it and pressure will build so it has to stop. As a matter of fact, the letter to Merrick Garland by Amnesty International and other groups specifically asks him and the Justice Department to review what we believe is the mishandling of this case and these flagrant conflicts of interest that have allowed a private corporation's law firm to act in the name of the state to deprive a human rights lawyer of his liberty. It's just not right. It's not what we know our judicial system to be. And I have to say, people around the world are appalled. I'm talking about serious lawyers from countries all over the world who have supported the Ecuadorians and supported their lawyers, are appalled to watch this happening in the United States of America.
So, Steve, as you pointed out, and as we began the lead, this larger story is not about you. It's about the devastation of Ecuador. And it's what you point out repeatedly, how you got involved with this. Can you talk about the $9.5 billion that was actually initially $18 billion judgment that Chevron owes to the Ecuadorian people? The majority of it allocated not just to clean up the soil and water, but to create support healthcare systems and treatment of cancer patients. The significance of what it was that first got you interested in this and that continues to this day.
Well, thank you, Amy. I mean, first of all, thanks for bringing that up, because ultimately this is not about Steven Donziger. Chevron wants that to be the story. This is about what Chevron did to poison the Amazon in Ecuador and really devastate the lives of tens of thousands of people, including resulting in death to thousands of people from cancers and other oil-related diseases. I first went to Ecuador in 1993 as part of a team of lawyers and doctors led by Cristobal Bonifaz to investigate this matter. I was kind of a marginal lawyer on a much larger team for several years. As the case evolved, I became more and more involved. I've worked on other cases, by the way, and I want to be clear, this is not my case. This is a case that is controlled and owned by the affected communities in Ecuador, who have a lot of other lawyers working on this. But like other people on that first trip, I couldn't turn my back on this problem. We have really tried year after year to seek a remedy to help save lives, to help repair the Amazon, to hold Chevron accountable so this kind of thing doesn't happen again. And we were very successful in our work. I mean, the judgment in Ecuador has been affirmed by Ecuador's Supreme Court, by Ecuador's Constitutional Court. It's been affirmed by Canada's Supreme Court for enforcement purposes in a unanimous decision in 2015. And the attacks on me really are efforts to utilize a New York federal judge to essentially disable my advocacy, because I've been so involved over so many years in so many aspects of this case, including fundraising. I've been to Ecuador over 200 times, to meet with my clients. They don't want me involved in this case, and they've calculated that if I'm locked up in my home, the case will somehow die. I will say this as a quick point. The case is very viable. There are lawyers in different countries around the world exploring opportunities to enforce the judgment against Chevron's assets, and that is happening completely independent of me. So while I really pray for me and my family to get a good outcome, I want to return to my work as a human rights lawyer or as a human rights advocate. This case will go on with or without me, and it's very important people understand it has the backing of courts all over the world, except this trial judge in the appellate court here in New York, which have really, I think, gone out of their way based on highly questionable evidence that Chevron has presented to try to attack me and the Ecuadorians.
So I wanted to bring Paul Pazimiño into this conversation, Associate Director of Amazon Watch. You, Amnesty International, National Lawyers Guild, and others are now appealing to Attorney General Merrick Garland. If you can talk about both what you're asking him to do, and then you too, as being involved with Amazon Watch and other groups, have been deeply involved with Ecuador. Your family lineage is back to Ecuador. Can you talk about what needs to happen now?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And thanks for covering this issue, Amy. I can't think of a more important topic when it comes to climate justice, corporate accountability, and what we're facing in terms of corporate power in the U.S. The letter that Amazon Watch and Amnesty USA and other groups have sent is, as Stephen pointed out, requesting that the new Attorney General conduct a review of how this case has been handled because of improper acts of targeting Stephen Donziger and locking him up in his home for a year and a half on misdemeanor contempt of court charges. The real thing that's going on here is Chevron is attempting to literally criminalize a human rights lawyer who beat them. He's never been accused, let alone convicted, of a crime anywhere. And now Chevron's machinations by Lewis Kaplan, this federal judge, and Preska, the judge that he has appointed, are on the cusp of turning him into a criminal because he didn't comply with Kaplan's outrageous contempt of court orders. And so Stephen Donziger for Chevron is a tactic. It's a tactic for them to avoid talking about what they actually did and have the world not look at what they actually did in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And what we want as the human rights and environmental justice community is for this new administration to check the corporate power that has manipulated the judicial system to turn Stephen Donziger into an example of what will happen if you stand up to corporate power in the United States. And it's a seriously chilling one. There's a coalition of organizations called Protect the Protest, which includes Amnesty and us and Greenpeace and many other groups who have banded together to protect each other from corporate slap attacks. And that's essentially what we're seeing in this case.
And explain the term slap attack.
SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. And this is how corporations prevent activists and organizations from standing up to their abuses. They immediately hit them with baseless lawsuits and force them to spend all the money sometimes that they have to defend themselves. And many states in the country do not have anti-SLAPP legislation. So if they file it in the right place, you are forced to defend yourself against a massive legal team in some cases. And in Chevron's case, we're talking about 60 law firms. Make no mistake, they did not just go after Stephen Donziger, although Stephen's been the target of their abuse. They came after Amazon Watch. They came after Rainforest Action Network. They came after their own shareholders. They came after journalists. This has been a scorched earth tactic by Chevron and their kill step law firm, Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, based in D.C. Gibson Dunn prides itself on what they call the kill step, which is a way to avoid international judgments on U.S. corporations by going after them in the United States. And what's so important about this is that the environmental racism that has been steeped from day one by the operations of a U.S. oil company is now being aided and abetted by the U.S. judiciary. Because what happened is the Ecuadorians have never had access to justice in the United States. As you heard from Stephen, when this suit was first brought against Texaco in New York, they spent 8 years fighting, and then New York's same district that is now holding Stephen in his home sent the case back to Ecuador saying that it was improper venue. This was based on Texaco arguing it should not be in New York. So again, the Ecuadorians, who have been suffering with pollution every single day, took their case again to Ecuador and fought for almost another decade to hold Chevron to account. And after they got that judgment, actually 2 weeks prior to that judgment, Chevron preemptively sued back in New York to prevent them from ever bringing that judgment to the United States. And the reason that's important is that they escaped the situation where they would be faced with the facts of their abuses in the Amazon, and a judge in the United States has yet to look at the facts of what they did and determine that they should pay to clean up. And what's dangerous for Chevron is that it's only the United States where they've been protected in, but they have assets around the world. So when Stephen Donziger was working with others to enforce that judgment internationally, that's when they turned not only to their SLAPP suit, but to criminalizing him, silencing him, and making sure that he can't continue his work to enforce that Ecuadorian judgment.
Vice produced a short documentary titled The World's Worst Oil-Related Disaster You've Never Heard of. I want to go to a clip.
Texaco utilized the cheapest technology in order to maximize their profit and economic resources, but in exchange for a larger impact on the environment and on people's health.
Out of every 20 babies that are born, 15 or 16 have the same condition. And now my daughter, who is so young, to have a disease such as cancer.
Steve Donziger, you tweeted indigenous leader El Heraldo Criollo of the COFAN is a man I greatly admire. He was a driving force behind the successful lawsuit against Chevron. Chevron engineers told him that oil was like milk and full of vitamins. He lost 2 children to cancer. Can you talk about him?
Oh, my God. Heraldo is one of the great leaders of the Ecuadorian Amazon, who has been one of the driving forces behind the lawsuit for years. I've known him since the early 1990s. He's a leader of the COFAN indigenous people. He tells these incredible stories from the 1980s when he was a young man. He lost children to the oil contamination. And when the indigenous peoples complained about it, that the Chevron engineers would say, oh, no, this is not a problem. This stuff has vitamins in it. It's like milk. I mean, can you imagine the level of disrespect and the level of abuse? And it raises a larger issue, which is this case has been led by people like Heraldo and other indigenous leaders and shamans and rural community leaders like Luis Llanza and other Ecuadorian lawyers who won a resounding victory in court. This case really isn't about me. Chevron has tried to make a caricature out of this case by focusing on me, and it's important to focus on the people who are really, really suffering and continue to suffer down in Ecuador.
We only have 10 seconds, but so there was a judgment reduced to $9 billion. What happens now?
The Ecuadorians, with their lawyers, will continue to try to enforce the judgment and against Chevron's assets and force the company to comply with the law. We've held them accountable. We won the judgment. We will continue to hold them accountable, forcing them to actually pay the judgment. So this case is viable and still going on.
And you remain under house arrest after 600 days. Steve Donziger, I want to thank you for being with us, human rights lawyer who successfully sued Chevron in Ecuador, waiting to hear if he will be freed after nearly 600 days of house arrest. I'm Amy Goodman. Stay safe. Wear a mask.